She belongs with us, my mother-in-law insisted, demanding that my husband's pregnant mistress sit front row at his funeral. Include her, my father-in-law added, and I agreed. Sister-in-law nodded, finally someone's being realistic about true family priorities. Aunt agreed, some women just need to step aside for the real family. But a second later, my in-laws froze as my brother walked in and said, "It's time someone told the truth." I'm Sarah, 34 years old, and until recently, I was married to Michael Reynolds for 8 years. We had what I thought was a solid marriage, 2 beautiful children, Emma, 6, and Jake, 4, and a comfortable life in suburban Denver, Colorado. Michael worked as a financial advisor at a prestigious firm downtown, making good money that allowed me to work part-time as a freelance graphic designer while being present for our kids. We had the white picket fence dream, or so I believed. Michael was charming, successful, and seemed devoted to our family. He coached Jake's Little League team, never missed Emma's dance recitals, and we had date nights twice a month like clockwork. But I should have known something was wrong when he started working late more frequently, when his phone became glued to his hand, and when he suddenly developed an interest in networking events that seemed to happen conveniently when I had other commitments. The classic signs were all there, but I trusted him completely. I was such a fool. The truth came crashing down 6 months ago when Michael was in a car accident. Not just any accident, he was driving with his pregnant mistress, Jessica Martinez, when a drunk driver slammed into their car at an intersection. Michael died on impact. Jessica survived with minor injuries, along with the baby she was carrying. His baby. The baby he never told me about. I found out about Jessica at the hospital. Picture this, I'm rushing through the emergency room doors, my heart pounding, desperately asking about my husband, when a very pregnant woman approaches me with tears streaming down her face. She introduces herself as Jessica and tells me she was in the car with Michael. At first, I thought maybe she was a colleague or client. Then she placed her hand on her swollen belly and said, "I'm so sorry for your loss. Michael talked about you and the kids constantly. He loved you all so much, but he loved this baby too." The world stopped. Everything around me went silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. This woman, this beautiful, young woman, she couldn't have been older than 25, was carrying my dead husband's child. The man I'd shared a bed with, raised children with, planned a future with, had been living an entirely different life behind my back. The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements, well-meaning friends bringing casseroles, and trying to explain to Emma and Jake why Daddy wasn't coming home. But the real nightmare began when Michael's family got involved. Michael's mother, Linda Reynolds, had always been what you might generously call difficult. She was one of those women who believed her son could do no wrong and that I had somehow trapped him into marriage and fatherhood. She made subtle comments about my cooking, my housekeeping, my parenting, and my appearance. Michael always brushed off her behavior, saying that's just how mom is, but I suspected she was much worse when he wasn't around. Linda's husband, Robert, was quieter but equally problematic. He had a way of making passive-aggressive comments disguised as jokes, and he'd often undermine my parenting decisions in front of the kids. Michael's sister, Amanda, was a carbon copy of her mother, entitled, judgmental, and convinced that the Reynolds family was somehow superior to everyone else. Michael's aunt, Patricia, was Linda's older sister and possibly even more toxic, if that was possible. After the initial shock of learning about Jessica and the baby, I thought surely Michael's family would be as devastated and angry as I was. I was wrong. So very wrong. 3 days after Michael's death, Linda called me and asked if we could meet to discuss the situation with Jessica. I assumed she wanted to strategize about how to handle the scandal discreetly, maybe discuss whether we should pursue any legal action or how to protect the kids from gossip. Instead, she sat me down in my own living room and delivered a speech that still makes my blood boil. "Sarah, honey," she began in that condescending tone I'd grown to hate, "I know this is difficult for you, but we need to think about what's best for everyone involved. Jessica is carrying Michael's child, our grandchild, and she's all alone now. We've been talking as a family, and we think the right thing to do is to include her in the funeral arrangements." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. Include her how? Well, she should sit with the family, of course. Front row, with us. She's carrying Michael's baby, which makes her part of the family now. The audacity was breathtaking. Linda, she's the woman my husband was cheating on me with. She destroyed my marriage. Now, Sarah, that's not fair. These things happen. Michael obviously cared deeply for Jessica, and she's grieving too. We can't punish her or the baby for the complicated situation that developed. Before I could respond, Robert chimed in from his chair. Linda's right, Sarah. We need to include her. It's what Michael would have wanted. I felt like I was losing my mind. What Michael would have wanted. Michael's dead, Robert. And what he wanted was apparently to have his cake and eat it too. Amanda, who had been quiet until this point, finally spoke up. Finally, someone's being realistic about true family priorities. Sarah, I know this hurts, but Jessica and that baby are Michael's legacy too. We can't just pretend they don't exist. The final blow came from Patricia, who had been nodding along with everything. Some women just need to step aside for the real family, honey. I know it's hard, but Jessica needs us now. I sat there in stunned silence as these people, my husband's family, people I'd spent 8 years trying to please, essentially told me that his pregnant mistress deserved a place of honor at his funeral while I should step aside. But here's the thing about being pushed to your absolute breaking point, sometimes it gives you a clarity you never had before. As I looked at their expectant faces, all of them waiting for me to meekly agree to this insane plan, something inside me snapped. Not in an angry, explosive way, but in a cold, calculating way. You know what? I said, forcing a calm smile. You're absolutely right. The relief on their faces was palpable. Linda actually clapped her hands together. Oh, I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this, dear. Yes, I continued, Jessica should definitely be included in the funeral. In fact, I think she should sit right up front with all of you. The whole family should be together. Exactly. Patricia beamed. I knew you'd come around. I'll call the funeral director and make sure there's a seat reserved for her right next to Linda, I said sweetly. We want to make sure everyone knows exactly where she belongs in this family. They were so pleased with themselves, so convinced that they'd successfully bullied me into submission. If only they'd known what I was really planning. You see, what Michael's family didn't know was that I had learned a lot more than just the existence of Jessica Martinez in the days following the accident. My brother David, who works as a private investigator in Denver, had done some digging at my request. I'd initially asked him to find out how long the affair had been going on, thinking it would help me process everything. What he found was so much more devastating than I'd imagined. Michael hadn't just been having an affair with Jessica. He'd been systematically stealing money from our joint accounts and from his clients' accounts to fund a completely separate life. He'd rented an apartment for Jessica, bought her a car, and was planning to leave me and the kids once the baby was born. He'd already consulted a divorce attorney and had been preparing to file papers that would have left me with almost nothing. But the real kicker? Jessica wasn't some innocent victim who'd fallen for a married man. She'd known about me and the kids from day one. In fact, she'd actively pursued Michael because she thought he was wealthy and could provide the lifestyle she wanted. David had found text messages between them where they mocked me, called me names, and laughed about how clueless I was. David had also discovered that Michael's financial crimes were about to be exposed. His firm was conducting an internal audit, and he was facing criminal charges that would have been filed within the week. The car accident had actually saved him from a very public downfall and prison time. But here's where the story gets really interesting. David didn't just gather information, he'd also been watching Michael's family's reaction to the whole situation. He'd seen Linda visit Jessica at the hospital, bringing flowers and gifts. He'd watched Amanda take Jessica shopping for maternity clothes. He'd observed Robert setting up a college fund for the unborn baby while my own children's college funds remained untouched. They weren't just accepting Jessica out of some noble desire to support Michael's child. They were actively choosing her over me and my kids. They saw Jessica as young, malleable, and easier to control than me. They thought they could mold her into the perfect Reynolds daughter-in-law while pushing the inconvenient wife and children out of the picture. The depth of their betrayal became even clearer when David showed me the surveillance photos he'd taken. There was Linda, helping Jessica pick out baby furniture at an expensive boutique while my own children hadn't received so much as a phone call since their father's death. There was Amanda, laughing over lunch with Jessica at the same restaurant where she'd once told me I needed to watch my weight if I wanted to keep Michael happy. There was Robert, proudly showing Jessica around the country club, introducing her to people as Michael's girlfriend while I was still planning his funeral. But the most devastating photo was one of Patricia hosting what appeared to be an informal baby shower for Jessica at her house. The same woman who had criticized every baby shower I'd ever thrown, who had complained that Emma and Jake were too loud at family gatherings, was now celebrating the arrival of her nephew's illegitimate child while completely ignoring his legitimate children. David had also recorded several conversations using audio equipment. The most damning was a phone call between Linda and Amanda, discussing their strategy for handling Sarah after the funeral. Linda's voice was crystal clear. Once we get Jessica established as part of the family, Sarah will realize she needs to step back. The children can visit, of course, but Jessica and the baby will be the priority now. Michael would have wanted it this way. Amanda's response was equally chilling. I think Sarah will be grateful, honestly. Raising 2 kids alone is expensive, and she's never been that ambitious anyway. If she's smart, she'll realize this arrangement benefits everyone. Jessica can be the primary mother figure, and Sarah can just be the fun aunt who sees the kids on weekends. They were literally planning to replace me with my husband's mistress and reduce my role in my own children's lives to occasional visits. The casual way they discussed dismantling my family was breathtaking in its cruelty. David had also discovered that Jessica had been feeding the Reynolds family lies about me from the beginning. She told them I was emotionally unstable and possibly abusive to the children. She claimed that Michael had confided in her about wanting a divorce for months but was afraid of how I might react. She painted herself as his protector and me as some sort of unhinged villain who was keeping him trapped in an unhappy marriage. The Reynolds family had eaten up every word of it. They'd been looking for an excuse to dislike me for years, and Jessica had provided them with the perfect narrative. In their minds, I wasn't the betrayed wife, I was the obstacle preventing their beloved Michael from being truly happy. But perhaps the most infuriating discovery was that Jessica had been actively encouraging the family to cut ties with Emma and Jake. David had found text messages where she suggested that the children would be better off with a clean break and that maintaining relationships with them would be confusing for everyone involved, especially my baby. She'd convinced them that my children were essentially baggage from Michael's previous life that they needed to move past. The woman who had destroyed my marriage was now working to destroy my children's relationships with their paternal family, and Michael's family was going along with it willingly. As David compiled all this evidence, we began formulating our plan. Initially, I'd wanted to confront the family privately, to give them a chance to see reason and maybe salvage some kind of relationship for the sake of Emma and Jake. But as the evidence mounted, it became clear that they were too invested in their new narrative to listen to logic or decency. That's when David suggested we use the funeral as our stage. Sarah, he said, they're counting on you being too polite, too grief-stricken, too concerned with appearances to make a scene. They think they can steamroll you into accepting their version of events because you won't want to cause drama at Michael's funeral. He was right. My whole life, I'd been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts and avoided confrontation. Michael's family had always counted on my desire to keep things pleasant, and they were banking on it now. But what if we turned the tables? David continued. What if we used their own tactics against them? They want to make a public statement by seating Jessica in the front row? Fine. Let's make sure everyone understands exactly what that statement means. We spent the next 2 days crafting our strategy. David would arrive after the service began, ostensibly as a latecomer paying his respects. He'd bring copies of all the evidence, the financial records, the text messages, the surveillance photos, the recorded conversations. When the time came for family members to speak, I would deliver my prepared remarks, setting the stage for David's revelation. The beauty of our plan was that we weren't going to lie about anything or manipulate any facts. We were simply going to tell the complete truth in a very public forum, something the Reynolds family was clearly not prepared for. David also reached out to several of Michael's colleagues who had been asking questions about the financial irregularities at his firm. They'd been conducting their own investigation and were grateful to share information that might help explain Michael's behavior in his final months. One of his co-workers, Janet, had been particularly suspicious of Michael's sudden lifestyle changes, the expensive watch, the new car, the mysterious phone calls during work hours. She'd noticed that he'd been working late on client accounts that didn't seem to require after-hours attention, and she'd started documenting inconsistencies in his reports. Janet agreed to attend the funeral and be prepared to speak about Michael's professional misconduct if needed. She brought along Tom, Michael's former partner, who had been reviewing the accounts Michael had handled and discovered the extent of the theft. We also contacted the local news station. While we didn't want to turn the funeral into a media circus, we knew that if our revelations gained traction, there would likely be follow-up stories about Michael's crimes and their impact on his victims. It was important that the narrative be accurate from the beginning. The night before the funeral, I sat Emma and Jake down for a difficult conversation. I couldn't let them be blindsided by what was going to happen, but I also couldn't give them details that would be traumatic or inappropriate for their ages. Tomorrow is going to be a very difficult day, I told them. Some people are going to say things about Daddy that might be confusing or upsetting. I want you to remember that no matter what anyone says, Daddy loved you both very much, and nothing that happened between grown-ups is your fault. Emma, wise beyond her 6 years, asked, "Is it about the lady from the hospital? The one with the baby?" I was amazed by her perception. "Yes, sweetheart. Some people think that lady should be treated like family, but Uncle David and I think that's wrong. We're going to tell everyone why we think it's wrong." Jake, not fully understanding but picking up on the tension, asked, "Are Grandma Linda and Grandpa Robert going to be mad at us?" My heart broke for him. "They might be upset, buddy, but not at you. They're upset because they made some bad choices, and now everyone is going to know about those choices." I assured them that my parents would be there to take them out of the service if things became too intense, and that no matter what happened, they were loved and protected. That's when David and I hatched our plan for the funeral. The day of Michael's service arrived, and I played my part perfectly. I dressed conservatively in a black dress that Linda had actually approved of beforehand. I did my makeup to look appropriately grief-stricken but not disheveled. I coached Emma and Jake on how to behave, and I arrived at the funeral home with a serene expression that suggested I had made peace with the situation. The funeral home was packed. Michael had been well liked in the community, and his sudden death had shocked everyone. As planned, Jessica was seated in the front row next to Linda, wearing a black maternity dress that Amanda had no doubt helped her choose. She looked appropriately somber and kept her hand protectively over her pregnant belly. Linda kept shooting me approving looks, clearly proud of how well I was handling everything. Robert nodded at me with what I think he believed was paternal approval. Amanda whispered something to Jessica that made her squeeze Amanda's hand gratefully. Patricia kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the grieving aunt perfectly. The service proceeded normally for the first half hour. The pastor spoke about Michael's life, his love for his family, his success in business. Several colleagues and friends shared memories. Michael's college roommate told a funny story about their fraternity days. His business partner talked about his dedication to his clients. Then it was time for family members to speak. Linda went first, giving a tearful tribute to her beloved son and how proud she was of the man he'd become. She made sure to mention all the lives he touched and how his love would live on in all of us. She even reached over and patted Jessica's hand when she mentioned Michael's lasting legacy. Amanda spoke next, talking about what a wonderful brother Michael had been and how he'd always put family first. The irony was almost too much to bear. Then Robert stood up and cleared his throat. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," he began. "Michael was not just my son-in-law, but the son I never had. He was a man of integrity, a devoted father, and a loving husband." He paused and looked directly at Jessica. "We're here today to celebrate his life and to support all the family he left behind, including the newest member who will carry on his name." The congregation murmured approvingly. Many people were clearly confused about who Jessica was, but they seemed to assume she was some sort of relative. I saw several of my friends looking puzzled but trying to be respectful. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I walked slowly to the podium, arranged my notes with shaking hands, and looked out at the crowded room. Linda beamed at me encouragingly. Jessica looked nervous but grateful. The whole Reynolds clan sat there smugly, convinced that their plan had worked perfectly. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. "Michael meant so much to so many people, and your presence here is a testament to the impact he had on all our lives." I paused and saw David slip in through the back doors of the funeral home. He wasn't alone. He brought back up. Before I share my memories of Michael, I think it's important that everyone here understands exactly who we're mourning today. Not the man we thought we knew, but the man he actually was. Linda's smile started to falter. Robert sat up straighter. Amanda looked confused. "You see, in the days since Michael's death, some information has come to light that I think you all deserve to know. Information that his family has decided to ignore in favor of a more comfortable narrative." That's when David stepped forward from the back of the room. "It's time someone told the truth," he announced in a clear, carrying voice. The entire funeral home went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Linda went pale. Robert's mouth fell open. Amanda grabbed Jessica's arm. Patricia actually gasped out loud. David walked down the center aisle carrying a manila folder thick with documents. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is David Chen, and I'm a private investigator. I'm also Sarah's brother. What I'm about to share with you is the result of a thorough investigation into Michael Reynolds' activities in the months leading up to his death." He reached the front of the room and turned to face the congregation. Michael Reynolds was not the man any of you thought he was. He was a thief, a liar, and a fraud who was facing federal charges for embezzling money from his clients' accounts. The murmur that rippled through the crowd was deafening. Several people stood up. I saw Michael's business partner's face go white. David continued. He used that stolen money to maintain a secret apartment and lifestyle for his pregnant mistress, Jessica Martinez, who is sitting in the front row there next to his mother. Every head in the funeral home turned to stare at Jessica, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Linda tried to stand up, but her legs seemed to give out. But that's not all, David said, opening his folder. Ms. Martinez was not some innocent woman who fell for a married man. She actively pursued Michael because she believed he was wealthy. In fact, I have text messages between them where they mock his wife and children and laugh about how easy it would be to get rid of them once the baby was born. He pulled out a stack of printed text messages and began reading aloud. These are from Jessica's phone, dated 3 months ago. Jessica writes, "I can't wait until you dump the boring wife and those bratty kids. We'll have so much more money to spend on ourselves and our baby." Jessica burst into tears and tried to leave, but the crowded pews made escape impossible. David wasn't finished. And Michael responds, "Sarah is so pathetic. She has no idea what's coming. Once I file for divorce, she'll be lucky to get anything. My lawyer says we can claim she's an unfit mother." The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. Several people were now standing and pointing at Jessica. Michael's business partner was on his phone, probably calling the authorities. "But here's my personal favorite," David said, his voice dripping with disgust. From Jessica, dated 6 weeks ago, "Your kids are so annoying when they call during our dates. Can't you just block their numbers?" And Michael replies, "Don't worry, baby. Once we're married, we'll move across the country and they'll barely be our problem anymore." I watched as the color drained from every face in the Reynolds family. They'd had no idea. They'd been so eager to embrace Jessica and push me aside that they'd never bothered to investigate what kind of person she really was. But David wasn't done destroying their carefully constructed narrative. "Now, I want everyone here to understand how the Reynolds family responded when they learned about Michael's infidelity and Jessica's pregnancy," he announced. "Did they rally around Sarah and her children, the actual victims in this situation? Did they offer support to the woman who'd been betrayed and humiliated?" He turned to look directly at Linda, Robert, Amanda, and Patricia. "No. They demanded that Jessica be given a place of honor at this funeral. They insisted that she sit in the front row with the family. They told Sarah she needed to step aside for the real family and be realistic about true family priorities." The crowd's murmur turned into outright angry voices. I saw several of my friends stand up and start making their way toward the front of the room. These were people who'd known me for years, who'd watched me support Michael's career, raise his children, and tried desperately to please his impossible family. "Linda Reynolds told my sister that some women just need to step aside," David continued. "Amanda Reynolds said Sarah should be realistic about true family priorities. They actually tried to convince a grieving widow that her cheating husband's pregnant mistress deserved precedence at his funeral." By now, Linda was sobbing. Robert was trying to pull her toward the exit, but the crowd was too thick and too angry to let them pass easily. Amanda was shouting, "This is all lies." But nobody was listening to her. Patricia had actually fainted and was being fanned by someone in the row behind her. But the best part was Jessica's reaction. Faced with a room full of people who now knew exactly what she was and what she'd done, she completely lost her composure. Instead of playing the victim, her true nature came out. "You don't understand," she screamed at the crowd. "Michael loved me more than her. He was going to leave her anyway. She's boring and pathetic, and he told me so every day." The gasps and shouts from the crowd were incredible. Here was this woman, at the funeral of a man she'd helped destroy, screaming about how superior she was to his widow. "I'm having his baby," she continued, standing up and pointing at me. "This baby is worth more than her stupid kids. Michael said so. He said this baby was going to be his fresh start." That's when one of Michael's colleagues, a man named Tom whom I'd known for years, stood up and addressed the crowd. "I need everyone to know that Sarah Reynolds has been nothing but gracious and kind in all the years I've known her. She supported Michael's career, raised beautiful children, and has handled this tragedy with more dignity than anyone could expect. What this family has put her through is disgusting." The crowd erupted in agreement. Person after person stood up to voice their support for me and their disgust with the Reynolds family's behavior. Michael's own friends and colleagues were turning against his family's narrative and rallying around me. Finally, I took the microphone back. The room gradually quieted as I prepared to speak. "I want to thank my brother David for having the courage to share the truth with all of you," I said, my voice stronger than it had been all day. "I also want you all to know that I didn't plan this to humiliate anyone. I planned this because Michael's children, my children, deserve to know that there are people in this world who will fight for them when their own family won't. I looked directly at Linda, who was still crying. You see, Emma and Jake have been asking me why Grandma Linda hasn't called them since Daddy died. They've been wondering why Aunt Amanda hasn't invited them over like she used to. They've been confused about why their own family seems to have forgotten about them. My voice broke slightly, but I continued. Today, they're going to learn that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally will abandon you for strangers. But they're also going to learn that there are people who will stand up for them no matter what. I gestured to the crowd. Look around, Emma and Jake. Look at all these people who knew your daddy but who love you and me enough to be here for us today. These are the people who matter. These are your real family. The applause was thunderous. Emma and Jake, who had been sitting with my parents during David's revelations, came running up to me. I scooped them both up as the crowd continued applauding. But I wasn't done. I have one more thing to share, I announced as the applause died down. In addition to stealing from his clients, Michael also emptied our children's college funds and our joint savings to pay for Jessica's apartment and lifestyle. Emma and Jake's future was sacrificed so that their father could play house with his mistress. The crowd's anger reached a fever pitch. Several people were now shouting at Jessica and the Reynolds family. Someone yelled, "How could you steal from children?" Another person shouted, "You should be ashamed of yourselves." Jessica, faced with a room full of hostile strangers and the complete destruction of her carefully constructed victim narrative, made one final desperate play. "None of this matters," she screamed. "I'm having Michael's son. His only son. That makes me more important than any of you." The silence that followed was deafening. Even her supporters in the Reynolds family looked horrified at her outburst. That's when my friend Kate, who had been like a sister to me for 15 years, stood up and delivered the final blow. "Jessica Martinez," she said in a voice that carried throughout the room, "you are exactly the kind of person who would sleep with a married man, steal from children, and then demand to be honored at his funeral. But let me tell you what you're not. You're not welcome in this community, you're not welcome in our lives, and you're certainly not welcome at this funeral." The crowd erupted in agreement. People were now actively booing Jessica and the Reynolds family. Several of Michael's colleagues were taking pictures, no doubt to share with others who couldn't attend. Finally, the funeral director stepped forward and announced that the service was concluded. The crowd began to file out, but not before dozens of people stopped to hug me, shake David's hand, and express their disgust with what they'd witnessed. Jessica tried to approach me as I was gathering my things, but Kate and several other friends formed a protective barrier around me and the kids. "Don't even think about it," Kate told her firmly. Linda made one last attempt to salvage the situation. "Sarah, please, we can work this out. We didn't know about the text messages or the stealing. We just thought." "You thought what, Linda?" I cut her off. "You thought that I should step aside so you could play happy family with the woman who helped destroy my marriage? You thought my children should accept being replaced by their father's illegitimate child?" "We were trying to do the right thing," Robert pleaded. "The right thing would have been to support your son's widow and his children," David interjected. "The right thing would have been to be furious that he betrayed his family. Instead, you chose to embrace his mistress and abandon his actual family." Amanda tried a different approach. "Sarah, we're family. We can't let this destroy us." I looked at her with genuine pity. "Amanda, we stopped being family the moment you decided that Jessica Martinez deserved my place at my own husband's funeral. We stopped being family when you chose a stranger over your own nephew and niece." As we prepared to leave, Jessica made one final, desperate attempt to maintain some dignity. "This isn't over," she called out. "I'm having Michael's child, and that means something." David turned around and faced her one last time. "Jessica, let me be very clear about something. That baby you're carrying? Michael planned to abandon it too. I have documentation showing that he was planning to claim it wasn't his once he got tired of you. He was using you just like he used everyone else." Her face crumpled as the final piece of her fantasy collapsed. The man she'd thought loved her enough to leave his family for had been planning to abandon her just like he'd abandoned us. The aftermath of the funeral was swift and decisive. Within hours, the story had spread throughout our community. Jessica became persona non grata everywhere she went. Michael's business partners issued a statement distancing themselves from his actions and expressing support for me and the children. Several of them even set up a fund to help replace the money Michael had stolen from Emma and Jake's college accounts. Linda, Robert, Amanda, and Patricia all tried to reach out to me in the following weeks, claiming they'd been misled about Jessica's character and asking for forgiveness. I declined all contact. Their actions had shown me exactly who they were when they thought it mattered, and I wasn't interested in their revisionist history now that the truth was public. Jessica gave birth to a son 2 months later. She named him Michael Jr., apparently still clinging to the fantasy that she was the legitimate heir to Michael's legacy. She tried to file for Social Security survivor benefits, but those went to Emma and Jake as his legal dependents. She also attempted to sue Michael's estate for support, but the fact that he'd been supporting her with stolen money made that impossible. The most satisfying part? The Reynolds family, so eager to embrace their new daughter-in-law, completely abandoned Jessica once the truth came out. Faced with a community that knew exactly what they'd done, they moved across the country within 6 months. Linda sent one final letter apologizing and begging to maintain contact with Emma and Jake, but I returned it unopened. As for Jessica, she ended up moving back to her home state with a baby, unable to find work or acceptance in Denver. The last I heard, she was working at a call center and living with her parents, still telling anyone who would listen that she was the real victim in the whole situation. My children and I are doing well now. The community support we received was overwhelming and heartwarming. Emma and Jake understand, in age-appropriate terms, that their father made bad choices that hurt people, but that those choices don't reflect on them or their worth as human beings. I've started dating again recently, a wonderful man named Chris who knew about my story from day one and has been incredibly patient and supportive. He's been great with the kids, and more importantly, he's shown me what genuine integrity looks like in a partner. David, my hero brother, has been approached by several other people in similar situations who need investigative help. He's thinking about specializing in cases involving infidelity and financial fraud. Looking back, I realize that Michael's death, as tragic as it was, actually saved me from years of being slowly gaslit and financially destroyed by a man I thought loved me. His family's true colors were revealed in a way that gave me clarity I might never have achieved otherwise. The funeral became legendary in our community. People still talk about that funeral where the truth came out, and it's become a cautionary tale about making assumptions and choosing sides too quickly. But the most important lesson I learned is this: when people show you who they really are, believe them the first time. Michael's family showed me that their love was conditional, their loyalty was fickle, and their values were completely opposite to mine. By trying to force me to honor the woman who had helped destroy my life, they freed me from any obligation to maintain relationships that were never genuine to begin with. I'm not proud of the public humiliation aspect of what we did, but I am proud of standing up for my children and myself when no one else would. Sometimes the truth needs to be told publicly, especially when people are using their power and influence to spread lies and manipulate situations to their advantage. Emma and Jake know that their mother will always fight for them, always tell them the truth, and never ask them to step aside for someone else's convenience. That's the legacy I want to leave them, not money that can be stolen or relationships that can be manipulated, but the absolute certainty that they are worthy of love, respect, and protection. As for whether I feel bad about what happened to Jessica and the Reynolds family? Not for a single second. They made their choices with full knowledge of the pain they were causing, and they faced the natural consequences of those choices. Sometimes justice looks like a courtroom, and sometimes it looks like a funeral where the whole community learns the truth about who you really are. The title of this post mentions that my in-laws froze when my brother walked in and said it was time someone told the truth. What I didn't expect was how liberating it would be to finally stop protecting people who had never protected me in return. The truth didn't just set the record straight, it set me free.